Hi, I'm going to go over basic sanding skills as well as how to cut the parts off the trees. I'm using this GM2 from Zeta Gundam that I'm working on for a newer project. Starting off, I've cut some pieces out just to start off. But the first steps I'm going to talk about is some of the sanding implements I have, such as sanding sticks, which is this. There's a very coarse side to this, and there's a not so coarse side. I usually use this first to start sanding away the plastic. I've cut out a piece of the shield, and with the nub marks, just lightly run this over where the nub marks were, and a couple of wipes, and the nub marks should be gone. Again, this is very coarse, so this will cut away a lot of plastic. You don't want to cut too much. Then I go with these are Norton sanding pads. They're like sponges, really good for some of these areas. The only problem with some of these sanding sponges is if you're sanding a flat surface and you curve it a little bit, you might end up giving curves to the plastic. So I usually go coarse and then go with the medium coarseness. This is about, according to this, 150. This is a 320, which is what this packaging is for. And the 320 is about as high as I go, and then I could go ahead and paint. I can see that there's a little bit of a white nub mark right there. And this is because of the cutting process. When you cut the plastic, like I have here, you want to cut it away from the nub a little bit. So I'm going to cut about there. So I leave a bit of the nub on the part. I'm going to cut the conjoining piece. And for example's sake, I'm going to cut really close to the part for this piece right here. So you can see the difference when I go when I go sand this. Another thing I like to do when I'm cutting these parts is the male and female parts fit together like so. What I like to do is I like to cut the male pieces by a quarter or by a half. Since I'm gonna mostly glue most of these parts together, this makes it easy to assemble and disassemble fairly quickly. There's still this centerpiece that should be cut. So you see that it's these male pegs are cut in half, and connecting them together, it's very easy to put together and very easy to pull apart. As I have the bottom two that I didn't cut, but you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and assemble the rest of this part together. Now what I hope you notice is I didn't take the part and I didn't go ahead and, as these were individual parts, start sanding the nubs. The reason I don't do that is because the way, well, for me, when I start sanding, I tend to sand in not a uniform direction. So what happens is I end up making a kind of a dent. So if you look at it like in this direction, when I end up sanding and I put these parts together, you're gonna have like a little dent like this where my fingernails are reached, as opposed to a flat surface kind of like that. So what I like to do is go ahead and sand as the parts together. That way I know that it's flush. And all I'm doing is just lightly sanding this down. I'm going to sand the other side as well. And you can generally know when to stop sanding when you see the nub marks disappear. I'm going to go ahead with the medium grit. And I'm basically just wiping. I'm not really you know, rubbing this very, very hard. I can see that, you know, there's still some roughness to it. You can see that the white marks from the nubs are there. And the white marks are because you're stressing the plastic. The closer you cut to the plastic, you're going to stress the plastic. So if I give you an example of this, cutting parts tree, I'm going to cut this, and what it does is it stresses the plastic, and that's where you get that white mark from. When you sand this down, you're going to have that stressed plastic over there. That's where the plastic, you know, stressed. So same thing with this area here is there's going to be a nub mark. Now if you're painting, this is not an issue. I usually run my fingernail across the nub to make sure that it's gone. Now over here I left a bit of the nub there, so I'm going to start sanding away the nub like I did before. And what happened is, since I cut away from the part, the point of the plastic stress is away from the plastic part. It's more on the further bits of the nub. So as I sand this away, get higher level of sanding, just wiping this lightly, letting the sandpaper do all the work, and then with the highest grit I have, the 320. Also have a brush of sorts that I could use to kind of clear. That made things worse. But you see that the nub's not there, as opposed to here where you can see the nubs are there, where I cut closely. You can run the fingernail and you don't feel the nub. Same thing here, you can run the fingernail across, you don't feel the nub. Now that's where that's been fixed. Now, I'm going to move on to the shoulder piece. Now, the funny thing about the shoulder piece, I'm going to prepare this as I did the chest piece, is cut off the male pieces a little bit and kind of put this together lightly. Now you notice that, again, I didn't sand this immediately after I cut it because I don't want there to be a divot here. Now, looking at the instructions, they have pictures of the kit. And right here, these shoulder pieces, doesn't look like there's a line in the middle of those. So that tells me this is not a panel line. That's actually a seam line that needs to be taken care of. Now, how I like to take care of seam lines is just using Tamiya extra thin cement. Gonna go ahead and kind of put this part close as possible, not close as possible, but close enough that there's a visual seam. Now, what I do next is, let me get a paper clip to prepare. And I have a paper clip that I'll use to clamp down on the part. What I do is I use a Tamiya extra thin cement. Now you can use any type of styrene cement and Mr. Cement Deluxe. That's a big applicator brush. But this Tamiya extra thin cement has a very thin applicator brush. Now what this does is this melts the plastic together. So it's kind of like a welding the plastic together. So I'm just going to apply to the center where my seam is. I'm just going to apply a liberal amount. Notice again, I didn't sand this down yet. I don't have to worry about that till later. I want to get the rest of this seam. Just applying glue everywhere. Well, everywhere the seam is at. Same here. Just apply glue. Once you have the glue applied, I'm just going to squeeze the part together. And you see that excess glue that comes out also with the excess plastic. Now this is basically melting the plastic together, welding it. Now, I could go ahead and add a little bit more glue, and this should seep in via capillary action. But it looks like a decent amount of glue has been seeped in there. Now you can sit here and hold this part for a while until it sets. But what I will do is I'll just use a paper clip like so and clamp down on the part. And just let this sit for at least 3 hours to a full day so that the glue has fully set up. The glue will take a while to cure up. You don't want to sand this immediately. But because if you start and the glue hasn't cured yet, you're just going to rip the plastic apart and make your seam worse. So that's that part. I'm going to go ahead and seam up the chest piece because there's seams here, and if we look at this picture, you see over here there's no line there. Even right here, there's no line between the shoulder pieces. So there is a seam, there's a panel line down here that you can see when you put the part together because it's actually in the plastic. But these areas up here, that's not an actual panel line. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply my glue like I did earlier. Continuing on with the seam line work, often asked what happens when you have a part and you have another part that goes over it and you need to seam it. So for instance, this piece, if I seam this up and try to fit this over this piece right here, it's gonna eventually break the seam. For some of these parts, you see those nubs right here. We're gonna have to work on getting rid of those nubs first. Before getting to the seam. Because if I glue this together, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to work or sand these seams after I've already glued this part together. It's possible, it's just a lot more work. Now that seam sanded down, I sanded this part down. So time to put this together. Now, usually when I do this, since this part can move, I could paint this part first, mask it off, and then paint the outside part. So that's generally what I do when I have these complex seamed parts. Apply my glue liberally. And press together for a nice seal. You see that plastic glue is coming out. That'll apply enough pressure to keep that part held together. You can move on to the rest of the seams. Now, focused on this piece, I'm going to go ahead and seam this arm, glue this arm together. When you're doing this, it's also a good idea to let the glue kind of work its action against the plastic a little bit. So what I'm doing is I've applied the glue, and then after I've applied the glue, I press the parts together and you get that nice plastic ooze that comes out, proving that you've got most of that seam. Another issue with these arm parts is they have these little inserts for where the shield goes. I don't really want to build it with that insert, so I'm going to apply some glue in here. And I'm just going to drop these plastic into here. Now what this does is this melts that styrene. This is a little bit of this plastic struck square styrene or square styrene strip that I put in there. And once this hardens up, I can sand this, and this box or that insert area will be gone. Go ahead and apply my clamp. Move on to the next piece. It's been a full day, and I've worked on one of the parts versus the other part, and you can see that as I move it around in light, the seam is gone on one piece and the seam's still there on the other piece. What I just do is, since once this is hardens up, I take my coarse grit, the sanding stick, and just sand away the seam. Now the plastic has had time to solidify up, the glue has cured, and I'm just gonna sand with the rough grit. You can run it through, look it through a light, and you can see that there's still a little bit of the glue or seam might still be there. So I'm gonna go ahead and sand a little bit more. Again, this is just using the rough grit to start off with. And you can see that pretty much it's gone. All I have to do is go on with the medium grit. Now this part is white, so it's kind of hard to tell where some of the scratches are, but once I prime this, it should be good. And there we have this part. You can see that it seems completely gone. You could run through the light a little bit, run a fingernail across, and for all intents and purposes, it looks pretty much like a solid piece. You can have a little bit of discoloring where that nub was, but that's very minor. If you're not painting this, you could go ahead and clear coat this, and your seam is pretty much gone with a slight discoloration, but it's barely noticeable. And this is all there is to fixing seams and sanding. You see what this does. for the gun piece. Now I'm using this piece as an example because it's easier to see, because it's a part that's gray in color. White is a little bit more difficult to see because of, it's white. So I'm gonna sand this down. Now you will see a little bit of the seam there still in existence, but you can see that once the seam's gone, scratches are gone, I can run my fingernail across this and not feel anything. All this needs is paint or a clear coat, and done with this part.